Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So I wanted to pivot a little bit away from the primaries back to the general election and talk a little bit about the midterm polls and the generic ballot, which we haven't exactly analyzed a whole lot. But I wanted to explain why I firmly believe that just like in 2016 and just like in 2020, the polls are underestimating the Republicans yet again. And I'm going to explain why that exactly is in this video. So we are absolutely going to dive into it all. Yes, Republicans have a lead in the generic ballot, but could their lead be a lot bigger than it currently is? We understand how the election mafia operates. They always double down. They never learn from their mistakes, and as a result, they're not learning, and I'm going to explain why, because it's 2022, it's been 6 years, and they still haven't learned, and in the swing states, it's going to be even worse. So we'll get into this, but I have to let you guys know, if you want to get all my exclusive content, buy my merchandise, join my Discord server, you could do all of this and more by going to redeaglepolitics.com. $5 a month, 16 cents a day. That's all it costs to get all the exclusive videos and Discord access and blog posts that you will not find on this YouTube channel. So make sure you do so. But beyond that point, these polls, once again, awful. And I'm going to explain why. And the first reason why is because you look at how many undecideds are in these polls. I mean, you look at it, and we have approximately, you add up these numbers, 13.5% of the midterm electorate is undecided. And you look at the polls that have Democrats and Republicans tied, like USA Today. You look at the polls like Politico Morning Consult, more commonly referred to as Morning Compost, and they have Democrats up by 2. But in that poll, there's 14% undecided. So a lot of undecideds are in these polls. When you look at Biden's approval rating on a net approval in these polls on aggregate, he is down at -15. Republicans are only up by 2.5, so it proves that it is a lagging indicator. And as more undecided voters end up coming home in these polls regardless, they are going to be coming home to the Republican Party, and Republicans are going to see a gain in the polls regardless. So beyond that point, you could look to 2010, where you see the fact that Republicans did not have a commanding lead until August, September, when likely voter screens were introduced, where they find out if people are enthusiastic to come out and vote or not. And those people are going to be more overrepresented in the polls, as they should, because it makes the polling more accurate. And I understand that polls actually overestimated Republicans by a couple of points in the generic ballot in 2010, but in 2014, the opposite happened, but you still see the same thing. Obama's approval rating was always in the low 40s, high 30s throughout the whole calendar year of 2014, and I understand it was a low turnout midterm, but you didn't see Republicans really start to take a lead at all in the generic ballot up until around September, and there were still a decent amount of undecideds, and they broke for the Republicans because the Republicans had the energy factor, and that's why they did it. So you look at both of these years as an example, it further confirms my point that Republicans are up by a lot more than just the 3% that the election mafia polls have them at right now. So beyond that point, you talk about the late gainers, it definitely adds up. And we know these swing states have even worse polls, right? And even if the polls end up at the end of the day saying Republicans are going to win by 6 points in the generic ballot, it's probably going to be by more than that when you take every single thing into consideration. This is true. Who is being polled? This is another question, especially in these regions. I mean, we know that Pennsylvania poll that came out that had John Fetterman, far left, crazy individual, as I like to call him, burly stoner Bernie Sanders, because that is exactly who he is on policy. He is little different than Bernie Sanders, except he has the optics of like a burly meathead stoner kind of guy. He looks like Shrek, honestly. And this poll out of Suffolk University had Fetterman up by 9 points. And you look into the poll and you look at Western Pennsylvania, and Fetterman had like a 30-point lead or so in Western Pennsylvania, much of which was Trump counties that were polled, and the whole region voted for Trump at large. And it's like, who's being reached? Is it going to be your steel worker that is working at the steel mill, that is that classic legacy Dem turned Trump voter that is socially conservative but, you know, economically a protectionist on trade? Or are they polling a teacher or a librarian? Like, who is more likely to answer the phone? These are other things that absolutely need to be taken into consideration, because whoever answers the phone is really going to determine the outcome of the poll. Just because somebody answers a phone in a specific region does not exactly mean that they are going to vote representatively of how that region votes, which is important. They've been saying for years, even though we have indisputable proof that the shy Trump voter does not exist, yet in every single poll so far that we've seen out of these places across the Rust Belt, across the Midwest, we're seeing the same thing happen over and over again. Look at how awful the polls have been in Iowa, in Wisconsin, in Ohio, and to a lesser extent, Pennsylvania and Michigan. And this is going to continue this cycle, and we know it because they have not adjusted their methodology. These pollsters have trashed Trafalgar, who in many cases is accurate, except the state of Georgia, which is their Achilles heel, even though they weren't really that bad in the runoffs in 2021 in Georgia, but they have been awful in Georgia. But in every other state, Trafalgar's been so good. Nate Silver, or Nate Plastic, over at 527, as I like to say, he decided to keep them in the polling aggregate, even though he was considering removing them because he gave them a C- and said they were awful. And then even after 2020, that debacle, he was forced to bump them up to an A-, and now they're one of the top pollsters in 538, which is hilarious. Do not forget 2016. Do not forget 2020. And people are going to say, well, what about 2018? Those midterms, the polls weren't bad. And that is true. The polls were pretty accurate for the national level in 2018. I mean, they were not even that bad for the national level in 2016, but the state polls, and we're seeing this yet again this cycle, they tend to be awful, and they will likely get better as we approach the midterms. Obviously, Glenn Youngkin was down big in most polls until like October, and then he started to take the lead in some polls, and the Virginia polling aggregate was only off by like 1 or 2 points in favor of the Democrats, and Youngkin outperformed the polls, except, my prediction, because my prediction was like, 2.1% or so, and he won by like the same margin I predicted, which basically tells you that you need to trust me. You don't need to trust these polling firms that don't know what they're doing. I've worked in one of these polling firms before, so it's not like I'm somebody that's, coming out of this without any experience. I've called people in Michigan before the 2018 midterms. You had a lot of angry Republicans when they find out that you're calling from a polling firm, especially from a polling firm that is from a university. They'll call you, they'll say, hey, you don't talk to me, you liberals, get me off your call list, and they'll hang up. And it's like, yeah, I can kind of sympathize with these people. Secretly to myself, I'm like, yo, based. But it's like a lot of these people, like those are real individuals that polls do not reach. You can't count that as a Republican vote. If you did, every single time you called a Republican and you got an angry Republican that was, really short with you and would hang up the phone, like that could be counted as an extra vote instantly. So that's another thing. But it's also important to understand the energy factor as well. I mean, you're more likely than not going to overperform the polls if you have the enthusiasm gap. In 2020, Trump supporters were far more enthusiastic to turn out for Trump than Biden voters were to turn out for Biden, and we understand this. Biden really only had any support to begin with because his name was not Donald J. Trump, and we know this, but beyond that point, you look at it, the energy factor, it matters big time. Republicans are angry. The average voter is angry. The economy is in shambles. Our border is wide open. Our politicians care more about a conflict that is happening halfway across the globe than they care about their own people at home. And that goes for both parties. And if there's going to be anything holding back the red wave, it's going to be weak Republican strategy. If they're going to cave on gun control and all these other things, and a lot of them are not, but I mean, a great deal of them are. Yeah, that is definitely going to hurt Republicans. They think, oh, we're going to cave, the left's going to like us now. And it's like, no. Oh, you'll get 0.1% more of the vote in the suburbs while you will bleed your energy support in the small towns and the rural areas and the exurbs that are necessary for your electoral success, especially across the Rust Belt. It is laughable, and we're going to be talking about this in a future video, probably later this week after the primaries, maybe on Thursday or Friday, about why the America First message is how the Republicans are going to win in 2022, but this is true. We look at these polls, and the polls are going to demoralize people as well. I mean, you see this R plus 2.5, and it's like, okay, well, even so, that would likely be enough to get Republicans 4 seats more in the Senate and probably retake the House by a sizable margin, maybe 20 30 seat gain compared to what they have now. We understand that, but it's not enough. It's not enough at all. I mean, R+3 would be great for 2024 in the generic ballot or even for the presidential ballot. I mean, that's doable. That's possible. It's pragmatic. I could see that. I'd like it to be higher. But, you know, we're very polarized in a full turnout election. But as a result, this is going to be a midterm wave year. And that wave has to come from the Republican side. It has to come from the America First Republican side. Thankfully, in a lot of these primaries, we're being successful. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, and it's not going to be done over one election cycle. We understand that, but looking at the bigger picture here, you see the fact that the Democrats are collapsing, and we have to take advantage of the opportunity both within the Republican primary so we can get the best candidates that are going to stand up for our values as much as possible. And then we also have to defeat the Democrats at the national level. Regardless of what the polls are going to say. Like, we understand the polls have Republicans up, but they're probably still underestimating them. I could see right now R+6 may be about right. If the economy gets worse, we could be talking about R+10. We could be talking about R+12. I don't think we could really go much past that because we are extremely polarized, but if you have an R+10 national environment, that means in a lot of these swing states where there are a lot of undecided swing voters, Republicans are going to be pulling in massive margins, big leads. They're going to be picking off House seats in places where they've really never had House seats before, and it's all because of the energy factor. And that's something that not a single poll is really able to grasp, but you look at history and there is a lot of precedence for it. So polls can be used as a useful tool. I'm not saying that they're completely useless. I think they tell us a lot about the elections. I'm not somebody that likes to disregard the polls completely. However, I'm somebody that understands that there are flaws in the polls, and for the past 10 years or so, ever since the 2012 election, it seems that the polls tend to underestimate the group with the energy factor, and they tend to especially underestimate Republicans, especially America First Republicans, across the swing states, especially the Rust Belt swing states that are trending right recently. So do keep all of this in mind and more as we move forward to 2022. You will see these polls that will have Republicans down in the state by a few points. Disregard them. You could take them with a grain of salt and understand that it's a little bit bigger than that, and the energy factor and the national environment are going to carry a lot of Republicans around the country to victory. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia for one last time, and Nevada, that's going to be a big one where the polls there are really wonky. They're really off the chain. You know, sometimes they'll underestimate you, sometimes they'll overestimate you. It is what it is. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below. And make sure you check out the website and buy the merch. The links are in the pinned comment for that. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.